Welcome to another DragonLance Saga Dungeon Mastering 101 episode. It is Palast Fluorgreen the Fourth. My name is Adam, and today we're talking about how to breathe life into your world. Now, we've seen it all. A DM starts explaining the 3,000-year history of a ruined tower, and the players start checking their phones. Now, you love your lore, but your players love their characters. The trick is to keep the campaign... the trick to a great campaign isn't getting players to read your lore, it's getting them to experience the lore. So today we are going to learn how to teach your players about the world without ever opening a history book. Now, I would like to take a moment and thank the DL Saga YouTube members and Patreon patrons and invite you to consider becoming a member or patron. You can even pick up Dragonlance Media or get $10 signing up to startplaying.games using my affiliate links in the description below. All right, so each of these DM101 episodes are really part of a larger course that I sort of mapped out here. And right now, we're going to be diving into the very first of the world building episode series. I think there's only like 3 or 4 that I've mapped out for this. So it's not a particularly long section, but it is one that is incredibly important. Because look, if you are creating a world for your players to explore, then usually DMs create a history to that world. Otherwise, it's not very detailed, it's not very developed, it's just sort of flat. And there's nothing wrong with that. Hex exploration is a great way to build out lore, but you are going to need some sort of history. Why do the people who inhabit this area of your map exist there? What caused them to stop traveling and set up shop there? You know, where did the civilization come from originally? So most DMs have this large grand scale of storytelling at the back end of their campaign world that they desperately want the players to realize, to learn about, so that they can then interject the character into that world and allow them to sort of manipulate it and help it grow. That's the goal anyway, right? It's not always easy, and lore dumps are arguably the worst thing anyone can ever do. So today's episode is all about just talking about how to effectively give your character or your players background and lore without creating it in a monologue, 20-minute exploration or sending them a manual to read so that they can understand. Because look, it only matters if it affects the characters in the moment. So let's dive into it. The lore dump ultimately is just a failure in design. If you have to stop the game to explore a piece of lore for more than 60 seconds, that's 1 full minute, then you've hit a dead end. Lore should be the reward for exploration, not a barrier to it. Now, you want to encourage your players to go through the game and explore, and through that exploration, they're going to learn history. But what you don't want to do is just have a handout that you hand to them and have them read from. Now, there is a bit of a rule here that I like to sort of fall back on, the rule of 3. Never give more than 3 sentences of pure history at once, unless a player specifically asks for more. Now, whether or not it's an NPC delivering that information, whether it's some sort of tablet of history or a book they discover, just never really go into full long depth. As long as players are asking questions, feel free to give them answers. But don't set it up where they're just sort of slack-jawed, wide-eyed as you're delivering a monologue of history. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is the diegetic storytelling. Now, this is where the world speaks rather than you delivering that historical monologue. So diegetic just means existing within the world. I don't even know if I'm saying that properly. So instead of you telling the players the lore, let the world tell the players the lore. I think one of the best modules that I've personally played, or run, I should say, is DL1 Dragons of Despair when it comes to explaining history through exploration. Most players have no idea when they first start the game, if they've never read the novels, for example, because the module came out before the novels, about Dragons of Despair, which is the very first of 4 adventures which are comprised the Chronicles Dragons of Autumn Twilight novel, right? So no one really knows what Zaxxaroth is, but it's really the biggest point of the entire DL1 module. You're supposed to go down there, do a little dungeon crawling, face a dragon for the first time, and take away these discs of Mishakal, which will bring back the gods to the world and allow clerics to exist once again. Because when you start, there is no healing magic, there is no clerics at all. And so it's a pretty big deal. But no one has a clue about it. There's something called Darkenwood, which no one knows anything about. There's a place called Haven and a whole religious movement called the Seeker Religion. No one knows anything about any of that. They don't know anything about Krynn. They don't know anything about the history of Krynn at all. So what the module does in order to fill in characters about all of that is have NPCs allowed to deliver certain pieces of information, which encourages the players to explore and to talk to people. And once you start unraveling that bit of information, you start realizing that there's a whole active world that is quite literally active as you are exploring it. Because there are timed events that occur where the Red Dragon Army is actively moving throughout Abanasinia, the region where the module takes place. And if you take too long, they're going to reveal themselves, and really there's nothing the players can do at that point. It's just too late. So the players are on a bit of a timetable to not only explore and understand the context of the world that they find themselves in, but also what they're supposed to do. And it's a really great way of just like an onion, peeling away layer after layer, giving them a whole sense of history and lore. Because once they get into Zaxxaroth, which is this ruined ancient city, they start delving down. They start meeting ghosts, spectral minions, which some of them are hostile, not all of them are, and they actually reveal information about this ancient ruined city. They reveal information about a cataclysm, which the players really don't have much information about at all. And just, it's a really wonderful way of unraveling the grander story that this DL1 Dragons of Despair is only the first part of. And so I think that is a wonderful way, if you ever wanted to sort of use another module as a way of getting your story out to your players, you can model it off of that as a really great starting point. But again, use the world itself to tell the story, use the NPCs to tell the story, and don't give them more than 3 sentences at a time unless they ask for it, because then it becomes monotonous and boring and they're not going to retain it all. So if the history is important, make sure you deliver in a digestible way. All right. So another way of doing this is NPC perspectives. So a drunk in a tavern doesn't know the official history of the War of the Lance. He knows what his grandfather told him about it. So lore through a biased NPC is always more interesting than objective truth. Now I've been running... Hey, Kim, how you doing? You also think history checks when the players ask for one can help? Oh, for sure. If you're using non-weapon proficiencies in your game system, or if you just have skills in your game system, that's a great way of doing it, because the characters would have a basic understanding of their region, and depending on where they are, how big the city is, you know, how much of a metropolis it might be, there would be larger scope of history they would be aware of just naturally. If they grew up in a farm in the middle of a field, then they probably don't know anything. But most characters have some sort of basis. So I always like to follow, like you mentioned here, Kim, on history checks. But also, if it's something more abstract about the world, arcane checks are a great way. Religion checks are a great way of giving out pieces of information without revealing everything all at once, giving little hints and suggestions. But I always filter everything through the idea of the individual, whether it's an NPC or whether it's a player character. So the idea of an official, objective, unbiased history, I just don't think it exists in life. It just doesn't. History is written by the winners in every case. And right now in our world, we are seeing revisionist history. We're seeing different versions of truth and facts being delivered depending on who you listen to, depending on what echo chamber you might find yourself in. Why would that not exist throughout all of time if it's existing in our time? And I think the reality is it has always existed, and that history is very subjective because it's all personal, right? Depending on who is telling it. So if you are at a NPC in the Inn of the Last Home in Solace, you're going to have a wildly different perspective because the War of the Lance hit you directly in as a, sort of compared to if you're in Sanchrist Isle, for example, where the War of the Lance never hit you at all. So you're going to have a different view of it. It's all going to be very hyper localized. It's going to be hyper focused on the Red Dragon Army because they're the ones that invaded Abanasinia and burned down Solace. If you're a player, depending on your background, let's say you're playing Tanis Half-Elven, and most of your life you grew up in Quillinesty, and then you left to Solace after a while. Your entire understanding of history is going to be from a royal historian teaching you history because he grew up as Solistarin's stepson, who is ostensibly the Quillinesty king. And so he's going to have a much better understanding of history compared to, say, Tasselhoff Burfoot, who is a Kender who is in the middle of a wanderlust collecting random pieces of tales throughout wherever he wanders. It's going to be much more crystal and clear and defined for Tanis than it is for Tasselhoff, even though Tasselhoff is going to have much more worldly experience. So use those cues to help deliver your history. I'm running a Tyranny of Dragons campaign right now, and there was a whole bunch of information about, and it's a heavily customized one for the fifth, the Age of Mortals in Dragonlance. But everyone that's involved in the cult of the dragon has a different understanding what it actually is. The higher up you go, that understanding changes dramatically. So it started as a cult of the dragon, but the truth is it's all a faction of the Cabal of the Code, which is a splinter secret police organization within the Dark Knights of Naraka, which is an evil knighthood in Dragonlance. So it's this highly controlled piece of information that the players didn't find out until near the end of the first half of the entire adventure campaign. 23 sessions in, they finally realized who and what it actually is that they've been chasing the entire time. And so they're dealing with information that's being suppressed by the Cabal of the Code, the secret police, because they don't want it to get out, because they're trying to leverage a certain outcome. And then you have different factions of the Dark Knights of Naraka, which are acting independently of their own accord with their own missions. So they're going to have completely different perspectives of the world, of their ambitions, of what the Knights of Naraka are. And so making sure that you're delivering perspective-based information to players sets up great experiences where I had an NPC putting them into a flying citadel, expecting them to be murdered once they stepped foot in there. And instead, what the NPC found out was that the players were able to sort of manipulate the situation, surrender to this character named Rezmir, and be imprisoned. And so they weren't killed. And so it fell back on this other NPC, Talus the White, to either get her ass kicked by the Cabal of the Code or deal with the heroes herself, because she was trying to avoid having to do that. But it was all information delivered inconsistently by people who are trying to work against the players, but the players have no idea about it. And so it's this great bait and switch of information that is really fun for the Dungeon Master, in my opinion, but also forces the players to pay attention to who is telling them what and whether or not that's a reliable narrator that they're getting the information from. It creates an entirely more mysterious campaign setting and engaging for the players. At least I hope. They might just hate everything that I'm doing, Hey, David, how you doing? Shame you're 10 minutes late. Oh, don't worry about it. You can go back in time. It's a thing. Okay, so the idea of objective truth is something that should only be from the position of a history book, and that is never the case where players are involved unless they're actively researching. If it's ever delivered lore, make sure it's through a perspective. My old drill sergeant used to always say, reality is 9/10 perspective. And I think that's very, very true. There is 1/10 of reality that just is, but everything else is filtered through your own experience or someone else's own experience. And so it is very, very different. And that's how you can have such divided echo chambers, socio-politically, that we have right now. And history itself being argued and contested like we have right now. Another way of delivering information is through songs and signs. So use the social interaction pillar that we've talked about that some players desperately love, and have them overhear nursery rhymes or songs that give hints of danger or hints of world locations or events. And this is something that I think Dragonlance really excels at as well. And it's something that I've tried to leverage when building my own campaign setting of Direlands, where because you have this established history and different cultures, you have to then interject their own cultural expressions, whether it's a lineage of storytelling or whether it's a lineage of music or actual writing of histories and how they perceive magic in different cultures, etc. I find it a great way to give hints and information, and you get that with DL1 because we have Goldmoon singing about where they got the blue crystal staff, why Riverwind went off to grab it, and how desperate she was to see him, setting up the fact that they love each other desperately, and because of that, they're ostracized because he is, not good enough for her dad, the chieftain. So you get all of that lore, and it's all just through a little song, and it's great, and it's actually a really good song too. All right, so the next segment I wanted to talk about here were environmental clues in order to disseminate information about the world lore. So show, don't tell is really what it breaks down to. And this is very much a video game sort of approach to TTRPGs. Every room should tell a story before an NPC even speaks. And you do find this, again, I'm just constantly referencing DL1 because it's so great. With Zaxxaroth, you go into specific rooms and they have the story. Was it a shopkeep? Was it a tax collector? And the spectral minion is there waiting to go on to the afterlife just to get that last tax fee in. It's actually in the game too, if you haven't ever played it or seen it played. So you have individual rooms with individual stories. If you go, there's like 3 different Gully Dwarf clans, Agar clans. Depending on where you go in there, you're going to get different versions of the who the High Bulp is, who's in charge of different areas, and the Agar Gully Dwarves were in Zaxxaroth way before the Dragon Army ever started invading it, and had Cassanthe the Black Dragon go in and use it as her lair. So all sorts of really great information just based on location. And then again, if you go into Haven, you can actually in the module go visit and talk to the High Seekers and get all sorts of information about the world solely based on the room or the building you're in. And it sort of describes it itself so you don't have to give those lore dumps. So you get this sort of before and after effect. Don't just say this is a ruined temple. Describe the broken statues of the forgotten god, which is the before, and the crude graffiti of the goblins currently living there, the after. You describe about how the Temple of Mishakal was once this shining, beautiful, pristine structure, and now it has fallen into decay and disuse, and the mosaics on the walls are scratched and crumbling off, as if someone has stolen them or broken through them to search for secret walls or hidden chambers or something. It lets you know that what it is, the location, but also this current state of it, and gives you clues as to why it is the way it is. And then, of course, because it's not a full-blown bit of information, the players start building that lore in their head and the mystery. Well, what do we have to be prepared for if we go in there? Who scratched the mosaics off the walls? Why is this entire city in disrepair and disuse? Well, what happened to it? It just gets those wheels turning so that when they drop in those clues later on, it starts painting a grander picture for them. Just one tiny little piece at a time. So the sensory lore is another great way of doing this. The smell of ozone in a wizard's tower tells players more about the magic there than the lecture on like the weave of magic or the power of magic ever would. A great way of doing this is talking about the towers of high sorcery and how they're these, especially the Tower of High Sorcery in Wayreth, how it finds you, you never find it, and how mysterious magic, this fraternal order of magic users is, and how tightly they control the use of magic on Krynn. It's a great way of setting up how magic is affected and operates in Krynn without going into huge lore dumps. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about here was the world as a character. So the world itself. Treat your setting like it has its own wants, its own moods, and its own leverage. I talked about this in a past episode when talking about NPCs, for example. So what is a want of the world? What is the location that they're in trying to hide from them? So in the case of DL1, the location of Zaxxaroth is trying to hide the discs of Mishakal, or the blue crystal staff, depending on the time, right? What is the mood of this location? Is the forest overwhelming or claustrophobic? Is the ruins is precariously hanging on the edge of the cliff of the New Sea, and it could fall into the New Sea at any moment. So the sense of urgency is filling the characters' minds that they have to get in here, find out what it is before they end up at the bottom of a lake. And then the leverage about this setting, right? What does this environment offer the players? Cover, height, resources. This is where the dungeon master should really be thinking about, and you can do it on the fly too if you're good at improv, but thinking about every setting. How can you describe the environment that would encourage the players to manipulate it? Now, I ran DL2 Dragons of Flame, I think a couple years ago at this point, and there's a point where they are in a slave caravan that's going down to Pax Tharkaz. And it's being led by these massive elk. And that's just a great visual in your head. But what it did was cause some of the players to be like, I want to ride a giant elk. That sounds amazing. So when they broke out of the slave caravan, some of them jumped up and started riding the elk around after they freed it from the caravan as they're attacking people. And it just, because you describe that they're there, it encourages players to think of ways of using and manipulating it. If you're crawling through the swamps of outside of Zaxxaroth, describe how there's vines hanging from the trees. There's these rickety rope ladders that stretch across patches of dry land that are interspersed by this murky marsh water. Players start thinking, well, how can I navigate this? If it's a rickety old bridge, is there a way of using the trees around me? Could I use some of the vines to try to swing around or reinforce the strength of the bridges? You're painting a picture for them to then manipulate and leverage the environment, which then allows them to interact with it and be very, very creative with it. So when the world feels like it has its own personality, players like to engage with it as if it were an NPC. So the next thing I wanted to talk about here was the lore as a tool and not a burden. So only give lore that is actionable to your players. If the history of a sword doesn't help them use the sword, or the history of a town doesn't help them navigate the town's politics, it's just background noise. Now, if the players ask for it, by all means, give it to them, but only give them what's going to be beneficial to them. If the purpose of them coming into town is to overthrow a corrupt constable or sheriff, well, then have the NPCs talk about how the town was once this great, fair, and just place that had a whole bunch of merchants coming through and business was great. But since this new sheriff took control and he's been really oppressive and overtaxing the local businesses, a lot of the businesses have failed. Merchant caravans stopped coming through because they were having to pay exorbitant tax prices. And so it just sort of ruined the town. You suddenly set up an idea for the players. Well, okay, this town sucks. Maybe we can help fix it. And maybe there's a little tangible reward on the other side of fixing it for this town, right? So you encourage them to engage simply by giving it a personality, giving them something to take action on. I was just running the Tyranny of Dragons campaign this last Saturday, and a player took one of the big bad guys' sword. Well, it's actually an intelligent sword that is evil. And so a good player grabs it, starts feeling that, and there's no game mechanic for it that I was using, just the idea that using this sword or trying to use the sword, you're fighting against some sort of other evil intellect. And it caused the player just to drop the sword because they didn't want to engage with whatever that was, which is a total viable thing. Sometimes you want to use the items because you feel that they are of significance, but sometimes you don't. And having that lore filled in just simply by holding it tells them all they need to know on whether they should use it or should not use it. Lore ultimately is leverage. Give the players a piece of history that allows them to bypass a fight or solve a puzzle. Then they're going to be hunting for your lore when it allows them to overcome obstacles. One of the things in DL1 that I always loved was that there are other Quayshu prisoners, and there's even a Kender down in Zaxxaroth, that if you explore the right areas, then you uncover these NPCs that will actually join the party and help you throughout the process. But if you don't explore, you don't find them. And so you encourage them to explore, either through leveraging the Agar Gully Dwarves or just through their own visual sensation of the individual city streets or the location itself, just this ruined temple. Use the locations to push them into lore directions rather than trying to just railroad them into an end goal. Then the onus is on the players, not you, the DM. Their choices are what are putting them in the precarious or positions of success that they find. They feel like they're in control and they enjoy it much more. All right, so the next thing I want to talk is the Dragonlance context of all of this. Krynn's living history. This can be a good thing, and this can be a very bad thing, especially with Dragonlance, because you have to understand where in the timeline you are running your game and where in the timeline the players have come from, because that's going to tell them everything they need to know on what they do know and how they would then understand the greater context of the world. So in Dragonlance, lore is the point. The absence of the gods, the cataclysm, the return of the dragons, these aren't just facts, they are the emotional weight of the setting. So make sure you don't lecture them about the cataclysm. Describe the Istar-made coins that are no longer legal tender that they might run across. One thing with the DL1 game, they were using Sarothian Kuli, which is this old, totally defunct monetary system based on clay, but it was just, you would put your money in the bank, they would issue you clay coolies, and it was just another way of spreading legal tender around. But of course, that was before the cataclysm. So when players run across massive piles of Sarothian Kuli, it looks like all this wonderful treasure and it's completely worthless because no one's going to take it. So you instantly understand that there's a history to the city. They used to have a legal tender, and now it is completely worthless because it was destroyed in the cataclysm. So you understand history without doing a lore dump, just through exploration. Or the way that maybe Solace residents still look to the sky when it's stormy outside, or when lightning strikes, or when there's a fire, just to make sure it's not the Red Dragon Army again, you know? Have the world influence the characters in the world, and that will tell the players everything they need to know about the world. Okay, and so the last thing I wanted to talk about, of course, I close all of these out pretty much with the DM101 mindset. Always reference curiosity over information. So your goal as the Dungeon Master is to make the players ask, wait, why is that statue crying? You know, why would that character act like that? Or why do they hate this different species? Once a player asks the question, you have gotten your permission to share the lore with them. You can either encourage them, or you can have them roll for it, as Ken mentioned earlier, or you can have an NPC deliver it to them. But you want the question to come up before you deliver all of that lore dump, because then it is asked for, it is wanted, and they know, because you're only going to be telling them what they need to know to overcome a certain situation or relevancy in the adventure, that it's important for them to pay attention to. So they're going to be taking notes, they're going to be paying attention, and they're going to be referencing it later on. Information without curiosity is just a lecture. Information after curiosity is discovery. Understanding that difference is going to make your game immersive versus just a college course that people are sitting and listening to. All right, so my closing takeaway here is you don't need your players to memorize your world Bible. You just need them to feel the weight, the gravity of the world. By using environmental clues, biased NPCs, and actionable history, you turn your world from a static map into a living story. Make them curious, and the world will build itself. All right, that's all I got. That was it. Thank you guys so much for watching another DM101 episode. Let me know, are these valuable to you in any way? Because I could be doing other types of shows. I just thought this would be a fun way of exploring the context of dungeon mastering through a bunch of different sort of framed courses and stuff like that. If it's something that you enjoy, definitely let me know, either in the live stream, thank you guys for tuning in so much, or putting it in the comments. And then if it's something that you don't want to check out, let me know what you would like to hear. Now, one thing that I have explored before is, of course, running one-off games or free little sessions or just having a little bit of fun on an evening. But I could also explore modules, just run through modules and talk about them with you guys. So there's a lot of different things that we could do with our time together. Let me know what you would like to see, and I will sort of bounce back with ideas of what I'm thinking of doing next. But we do have a handful of episodes left in this DM101 series that I've put together. So once we're done with those, we can move on to really whatever you guys think would be fun. So let me know what you think. I would like to take a moment and invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, ring the bell to get notified about upcoming videos, and click the like button. It all goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. I just want to give a quick thank you to creator patrons Aaron Hardy, D. Robert Handy, and ShakyManor, developer patrons Chris Androu and Sam Ruiz, and of course all of you YouTube members. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of DragonLance Saga, and I hope you join me in the celebration. Thank you for watching. This has been Adam with DragonLance Saga, and until next time, Sláinte mhath.